Hey guys, it's Tom. Welcome to the Pornstar channel and another episode of Nerd Alert. Today is going to be a little bit different than previous episodes. Previous episodes were very much about theoretical conversations about certain aspects of your front suspension work and such. Today, we're going to talk about something a lot more hands-on. Today, we're going to take a look at how you can set up your car to make it the easiest to drift. So to start this conversation, we need to quickly review together what we consider a car that's easy to drift. When you're approaching a turn and you turn the steering wheel and the car does not want to turn and it pushes across its front wheel, that's known as understeer. When you turn in and the car readily turns into the corner and starts to rotate actually more than you bargained for and the tail comes around on you, that is oversteer, which naturally for drifting, that's what we want. So for this video, we're going to look at how you can change the setup on your car to get it to rotate very easily. You want your car to start oversteering without having to torture the car to do it. That makes for a car that ends up being easy to drift. When it comes to vehicle dynamics and drifting, a while back I coined the phrase grip equals speed, power equals smoke. What do I mean by that is basically that you can have a low horsepower car that gets very high cornering speeds while drifting. Basically what that means is that the more grip your car has, the faster it will be. Not just in grip racing like autocross, time attack and all that, no. Also in drifting. The laws of physics apply in the same way as far as that's concerned. In order for your car to be easy to drift, you want the cornering speeds to be low. The behavior of your car will be way more forgiving, you have more time to react, it's easier to catch a spin, and if you should actually run out of luck, you're going to have a lower speed to deal with when going off course and trying to avoid hitting things. So today, we're going to be exploring ways to make drifting easier for you, but we're going to do it in a way that doesn't hold back future growth. Meaning, you're not going to be putting parts on your car that aren't able to grow with your skill. So as you get better, as you get into tandeming, as you want to catch your friends, and you want the speed in corner to go up, the things we're discussing today are not going to get in the way of that down the road. If you remember from a previous episode, we still have a doodle up here of a car actually drifting. Keeping in mind that grip equals speed, if we have agreed on wanting to make the car easier and slower to drift, that means we need to take grip out. Obviously, we're going to want to take the grip out of the rear of the car, not the front. Your front wheels are the ones that determine where your car is going, and they are also your primary resource when it comes to slowing the car down. So you really do want to have as much front grip as possible. Even if you're just starting out with this hobby, it's probably a good idea to at the very least put good front tires on your car. Something in the order of a 200 treadwear autocross type tire will probably serve you well. Even if you don't feel the need to spend a lot of money on parts or anything, it's a really good investment to have very nice tires up front instead of just junkyard burners. For today's video, this marks the extent of what we're talking about the front of the car. The rest of this is all going to be about the rear. I prepared a little visual aid that you can see that's split up into 4 main categories that contribute to rear grip. As you can see in this visual representation, while they all have an impact on the rear traction of your car, the changes you can make to them have different severity on the behavior of your car. So we're going to be talking about these in order from biggest impact to smallest impact. Let's get started. Tires. Shouldn't be much of a shocker, right? Ideally, the only part to touch the road on your car is also one of the most important ones. Tires make the biggest difference for a car's performance. There's nothing else that affects your car as much as tires will. When you look at old supercars from the 90s and how they performed and how slow they all are by today's standards, a lot of that has to do with the tires from the time. If you take an old performance car and put modern tires on it, its performance will automatically increase a whole bunch. When it comes to drifting, you want your tires to have good life so you can get a lot of laps out of them. You want them to have consistent grip through a wide range of temperatures, and you want them to have consistent grip throughout the tread life, so that the tire ideally behaves the same when it's brand new versus when it's down to the course. Looking at the rear tires on our cars, what do those tires actually have to put up with when we're drifting? Quick visualization, very simplified, of how the available traction on a tire works. This is your car just sitting there parked. The outlines visualize how much the tire can hold before it starts to slip. It will have limits of both longitudinal and lateral acceleration that it can support before it runs out of grip. So for our theoretical representation of what the tire has to deal with, let's assume you're launching your car in first gear, where you have the most torque multiplication available in your powertrain, and you're just getting on it. And what will happen is you'll blow your tires off and you won't be going anywhere very fast because it exceeded how much grip the tire can provide. Say you're driving the same car down the road in second gear and it doesn't have enough power to break the tires loose. You can just floor it and the car will take off, and you will utilize potentially most and almost all of the available traction going forward depending on the cars and the tires. Now let's think about that in terms of drifting. When you're going around a turn in grip fashion and you are neither on the throttle nor off the throttle, you're right in that sweet spot where the car is maintaining the same speed. So you're not accelerating forward and you're also not trying to slow down. Then the tire will have a lateral load on it. And of course, there's a certain limit to that as well. So as you increase that speed, there will be a speed with a certain angle for a certain corner radius and all that, where the car will start losing traction. And that dot on our visual representation will be outside of the grip that the tire can provide. Now, when it comes to drifting, you have to hold lateral acceleration, but you're also throttling the car because your rear wheels aren't where they should be. You kick the rear out while drifting, and so they're on a wider radius, meaning they need to go faster than your front wheels, and you need to maintain a state of slip. So you need a whole bunch of overspeed compared to grip driving that turn. So what different compounds, pressures, and all that do, going back to the little visualization, is just it changes the limits of what the tire can hold. So if you purposely use a tire that's not as sticky, it'll make it easier to break it loose and it'll make it easier to drift. One of the problems with tires is that the market is changing all the time. If I give you recommendations right now for what tires to use and you watch this video 2 years from now, odds are the market has completely changed again. The prices for that tire may have skyrocketed. That tire may no longer be available. They may have changed the compound and the tire is now crap. So it's really hard to make tire recommendations. So I'm going to try and give you just a few basic thoughts on the matter. Now let's talk about a subcategory list, if you will, of what affects the grip of your tire itself. Compound, size, and pressure. Those are going to be the biggest three. When it comes to tires themselves, the compound is going to have a way bigger impact on your grip levels than the size. Whether you go with 205s or 215s, that difference is almost negligible compared to the compound, say a 480 treadwear all-season tire versus a 180 treadwear autocross tire. Size, yes, of course, it matters as well. If you run a 265 or a 205, the grip levels will definitely be different. So with this video having in mind that you are starting out, the good news is that you don't need to buy ginormous tires. It's perfectly fine to drift on 205s or 225s. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Tire pressure. This is a fun one because Tire pressure has a huge impact on how a specific tire behaves on your car. Basically, what you're controlling with the tire pressure is the stiffness of the tire. So when the weight of the car rests on the tire, it will have a certain contact patch. And then through 100 different variables, including how flat or banked the track is, the speed you're going at, all the variables in your suspension, the contact patch is going to change. But universally true, the harder the tire, meaning the higher the pressure, the smaller your contact patch, versus the more deflated the tire is, the more of the tire can contact the road. So less pressure, more grip, more pressure, less grip. The trick with that is that it's not linear. There is like a bell curve that you would plot of where a sweet spot for a certain tire is, because obviously once you air the tire down too much, it simply won't have the structural integrity to support the loads. It simply mechanically won't be able to support the loads because the sidewalls will collapse and such. Likewise, having the tire overinflated will get to the point where it's also detrimental to how the tire behaves. And I know that there are plenty of people out there that run Kendas at 100 psi. Me personally, I'm not a fan of that practice. Especially if you're running like fiberglass over fenders and quarter panels and stuff. I've seen tires blow up and literally take out body panels. So I'm not a big fan of getting way carried away with the tire pressure. In my personal opinion, you should find a tire that works for you and that you can run between 35 and 55 psi, like I would call a moderate amount of tire pressure, and behave well. Examples of tires that fit into this category of they're great to start on, don't break the bank, and are extremely smooth to drive on are Antares Engines A1, Ironman iMove 2, there are Westlakes, there are lots of tires out there that are really well suited for when you purposely want to drive slow. Of course, everybody's running Kendas, and Kendas are amazing. I love Kendas. Matter of fact, if you look back there, you'll see a bunch of stacks of Kendas. But when you are just starting out, even a 300 treadwear Kenda is actually a pretty sticky tire. And you have to abuse your car quite a bit more to slide it on a Kenda versus sliding it on an Antares. So I would suggest to start out, don't look at summer and performance tires, look at all-season tires. And there's a lot of good choices out there for those, and the benefit is too that they're really cheap. Coilovers / springs and shocks. These parts have a big impact on how much traction your car has. When you think about the purpose of your springs is to give the car the means to adapt to uneven road surface. When you're going over a bump, the springs in your car compress and allow the wheels to follow the terrain that you're going over. As a general rule, the softer your springs are, the better it is for grip. The harder your springs are, the worse it is for grip. If you drop a coil spring onto the ground, it'll jump right back up, essentially. So springs will bounce. That's where your shocks come in. Your shocks purposely slow down the motion of the vehicle. Like when you're on the freeway and you're driving behind some kind of shitbox with worn out shocks, you can see anytime there's a step in the road, the car just keeps bouncing. That's what the shocks are mitigating. Your tire is what contacts the road and affects a huge portion of how much traction your car has. The shocks and springs basically determine how much stress there is on your tires when they're going over these imperfections in the road surface, for example. So it puts less stress on the tire if your suspension is soft, and it puts more stress on the tire if the suspension is stiff. So for grip purposes, softer is better. Of course, as with most things, it isn't as simple as just a linear correlation with, oh, you go infinitely soft, you have infinite grip. That's not how it works. It's another one of them bell curve situations where for a specific setup, there is a sweet spot where you have the most grip, so on and so forth. The $1 million question, of course, is now going to be, what should you use on your drift car? What kind of coilovers should you buy? What kind of spring rates should you buy? And unfortunately, there is no easy answer for that. My recommendation is that you stay away from advice that you get from actually the drifting and the stance community. And I would stretch out my feelers for your particular chassis more towards the grip racing crowd. So you look at your autocrossers and your time attack and track day guys, typically for just about every car that you want to drift, use their collective knowledge as a starting point for what you should use in your drift car for springs and shocks. Because in my opinion, there is a bit of a tendency out there for people to purposely go way too stiff on all the stuff on their drift cars. And we talked about how we want to set up our car to be easy for drifting, right? And stiffer means less grip. Less grip means less speed. So you'd think that I'd come out here and say, hey, yeah, get some 40K springs and send it. But I think that that's not really a good move, because we also wanted to keep in mind that the car can grow with you as your skill grows. And you really don't want to constantly be changing your springs and or shocks and coilovers or whatever. So I would limit the grip elsewhere. So when it comes to springs and shocks, let's just put what works on your car. Let's make those changes that make your car easier to drift elsewhere. Your car will ride so much smoother if it is on properly spec'd coilovers than on some stance boy parts. A car that rides smooth is a car that's easier to drive. A lot of grassroots drift events are at oval tracks. If you have transitions from like the bank into the infield and there are steps in there, and you have a car that's stiff as a board, those transitions are going to be unnecessarily hard for you to control. So in my opinion, coilover, springs, shocks, whatever, stick to something that works for grip guys. Every chassis and every car is different. The weight of the car, what kind of engine you're running in it, whether the car is full interior with like a big subwoofer in the trunk or it's all gutted, the width of the car, whether you put an angle kit on it that extends your arms by like 3 inches or whether it's stock, the track width, all that stuff will factor into your choices of shocks and springs. If you happen to drive an 8.6 DRC FRS, whatever, like this one right here, as a reference, I run 6K springs in the front of this car and 5K springs in the rear. A lot of people will tell you that that's way too soft. I happen to like it a lot, so there's a lot of personal preference that plays into all this stuff too. Saying that though, because all the cars are so different, just because that's what I do on this car, doesn't mean that that's right for your E36 or for your 350C or whatever. It's just a reference. Sway bars. This is probably one of my favorite topics when it comes to drift car suspension. Sway bars make such a huge difference in how your car handles. A sway bar is simply a torsion spring with 2 levers on the end that are mounted to the chassis of the car, and then they connect to some point on the suspension of the left and the right side of the car. Now what will happen is, if you drive your car over like say a speed bump, your suspension will compress, the torsion spring that's mounted to the chassis will pivot, both suspension arms will, go up, and there will be no load on the sway bar. When you're turning a corner, however, the mass of the car will want to transfer to the outside. As the suspension on the outside of the car compresses, that link will now get torqued by whichever suspension arm it is connected to, and as such, it'll counteract the roll, hence anti-roll bar. On the other end, it'll support against the other part of the suspension and fight the roll of the chassis. Sway bars are extremely effective at tuning your understeer and oversteer characteristics in your car. So with the premise of easy drifting, you want to stiffen the sway bar in the rear. Using Blue as an example again, she's got a Hotchkiss sway bar in the back. I wouldn't just go up to a random size and go from, I don't know, maybe your car has a 20mm sway bar, so now you're getting a 30mm sway bar. What I would suggest is that you get yourself an adjustable sway bar. all most adjustable sway bars are sway bars where the links that you connect to your suspension have multiple mounting holes. So all you're changing, you're using the same sway bar, of course, but because of the different mounting positions, you're changing the length of the lever that your suspension has to torque the sway bar. That means the longer the links are, so the further out from the center of the sway bar, that mounting position is going to be your softest setting because you're giving your suspension the most leverage to twist the sway bar. Versus if you use the holes that are closest to the center of the sway bar, that lever will be smaller, therefore your suspension has less leverage to twist the bar and it'll be stiffer. So if you get an adjustable sway bar for your car, you can install it on your car, set it to the stiffest setting, for example, go drive the car. If it rotates too eagerly and you don't have enough rear grip now and you think it's too snappy, then you can just, even at an event in the pits, it's not really that hard to do, you can just reposition your connection point to one hole forward and so forth. You can fine tune the behavior of how much the car likes to rotate very easily. And the beauty of this is that as you want to increase the speed of your car and you want to increase the grip, you can just reposition which holes you use in your sway bar. Another topic to cover are your alignment specs. We're going to be talking about the camber on the rear suspension of your car and the toe on the rear of your car. As your rear suspension travels through its range of motion, that camber does not typically stay uniform. That camber will change. And on a lot of cars, especially older BMWs, for example, they're notorious for this. As you compress the suspension more, they gain a lot of negative camber. What you want for your drift car is you want to, in the condition that you're actually driving in, the tire to wear as uniform as possible. So basically, you need to tune your camber based on your tire wear. A good starting point is statically to shoot for 0 camber. As the tires get loaded and as you're cornering, they will get a little bit of negative camber, but the tires also deflect, and that deflection of the tire will tend to wear the outside shoulder more, so a little bit of negative dynamic camber will compensate for that and give you more uniform tire wear. Issues usually arise when you have a car that's absolutely slammed on its ass and all the suspension geometry is all whack now, and so anytime the suspension compresses, it has crazy camber gains. Severe negative camber will give you less traction, which will make it easier to drift, right? The problem is, if you want to progress as a driver, you want seat time, and you get more seat time if you spend less time changing your tires. You'll change a lot more tires if you only wear half the tire away. So you want to tune your rear suspension to give you good wear characteristics and, if possible, no camber wear. Depending on the car that you're using, that may be something that you can adjust with the OEM components. You may have to buy adjustable control arms and such. That will vary depending on what you're actually using. Adjustable suspension arms will never be a waste of money. And getting more seat time out of your tire will make you a better driver. So it's definitely a good thing to do. Lastly, I'm a little conflicted on whether or not I should talk about the toe, because this could be a little controversial, I'm thinking. But basically, as a starting point, a lot of people will tell you to go with 0 toe. You want more grip out of the rear of the car and being able to propel the car forward better or more traction. You typically want a little bit of toe in, meaning the rear tires, when you look at it from the top down, point towards the front of the car. If you want your car to be more eager to rotate and to get into drift easier, running a little bit of toe out, and I'm talking like half a degree, can aid that. It's just, like I said, when it comes to toe, a little bit goes a long way. So I would experiment with the other things first, but if you feel like you could still use a little help, it's something to consider. Everything we covered today will make your car slower and easier to drive. So as you progress, you'll probably want to start going in the opposite direction of your changes, and you probably want to speed up your car to be better at tandeming with your friends. When you're actually trying to get faster, there are things that are also very critical on the front end of the car that we didn't cover today, because they're going to not have as big of an effect on purposely slowing you down. So I hope you find this video helpful. I can't wait to get out on track again. The snow is melting. We're almost there. See you guys soon.